One of the most important decisions any leader makes is deciding who will be a part of the organization, who should be hired, who should be promoted to positions of authority, and making better decisions about people will make you a better leader. Hiring and promoting those who are most capable is essential to the success of the organization and any leader. The results on predicting job performance and the poor ability of interviews to predict job performance is one of the best established findings in the research in industrial organizational psychology and organizational behavior. We have known for decades that interviews are terrible predictors of performance. And some scholars have called it the greatest failing of the field, that we have not disseminated this message more widely and that it has not been understood, adopted, and believed by more organizations. So this is a profound question in psychology. Why is behavior so hard to predict? And the answer to that is complicated. It arises in part because behavior is not a simple relationship between personality and behavior. It's not like extroverted people are always talkative and loquacious. Everybody is quiet and doesn't make eye contact with others. If they're in an elevator with strangers, the situation has an enormously powerful effect. And that's one of the challenges predicting work performance is predicting work performance necessarily involves predicting behavior in a situation whose basic elements you can't define yet. Who are they going to be working with? What are the work assignments going to be? Without knowing the answers to these questions, you can't specify what the situation is. And so personality will be of limited value anticipating those behaviors. Most companies don't hire everybody that they interview, and so they have only a selective view of the evidence. They might be able to detect false positives, that is, people that they hire who don't turn out that well, but they can always imagine that the people they didn't hire would have been worse, and so go on having faith in their own ability to select when, in fact, they don't have the evidence that would allow them to make that assessment. Perhaps the Achilles heel of the unstructured job interview is the fact that each candidate faces a different situation. If you ask different questions in every interview, you got inconsistent situations, and the performances aren't comparable across candidates. The simple solution there is to structure your interviews. It is the single most important recommendation that comes out of the vast literature on the effectiveness of job interviews. Structure your interviews. What that means is each interviewer asks each candidate the same set of questions in the same order and scores each response. Obviously, the questions should be ones that are work relevant and are useful for predicting future job performance. There also ought to be a right answer. If there isn't a right answer, then the question is not useful for discriminating between successful candidates, candidates who will be good, and candidates who won't be so good. And so each question should have a right answer, and you should be able to score that right answer. And those scores then get tabulated at the end after the interview and fed into some process. Usually you average over those scores and then average over interviewers, and you have some quantitative assessment of the candidate. My students, in addressing my concerns, my indictment of the effectiveness of interviews, inevitably point to other less easily quantifiable aspects of work performance, most notably fit. They say, well, I can't tell how someone's going to perform on the midterm exam. By implication, they're also confessing they can't predict how someone will perform on the job, but they say, I can assess fit. I can figure out whether someone would be a good fit in the organization's culture or whether I'd like to sit next to them. I know that people believe that they can assess fit, but when pushed as to what that means, most have only the vaguest of responses. Well, if I like them, well, where do your feelings of liking come from? Is it because the person looks like you, talks like you, is a similar demographic, age, race, went to the same schools? Without having a clear definition of what fit is, and how to assess it, I worry a great deal that fit is nothing more than a judgment of how similar the person is to you, and opens the door to many prejudices and biases that I think even my students would say they don't want influencing their selection decisions. Yeah, intelligence assessments have many strengths over the traditional interview. For one thing, they're consistent in evaluating all the candidates. Similarly, it's possible to get very well-designed tests of general mental ability that have been validated over years of research and produce consistent scores for each person. It is also possible to get such tests that don't include other components that we would rather not consider, such as race, gender, language ability, cultural background. So there are intelligence tests that rely on pattern matching, such as Raven's progressive matrices, that don't build in to the test language ability or cultural familiarity that some English-based intelligence tests may include. If you have to pick just one trait for a successful employee, intelligence is a pretty good one. But there are many others you could add to the list. If you can get good, hard-to-fake tests of those skills, you should include them in your assessment of candidates and who you hire. Is an unbiased approach possible? It is a dream worth reaching for that may always lie outside our grasp, but striving to be less biased in our decisions, especially our personnel decisions, will pay dividends. It will make us better decision makers. We will hire better people. The story that I tell in class is about the London Symphony Orchestra, when they realized that gender biases were interfering with who they hired. There are lots of good female musicians out there, but there were many years where the London Symphony Orchestra was exclusively male. They wanted to make gender less of a factor in who they hired in the orchestra, and so they started having people audition behind a screen. So the people who were making the decision about how well they played could not see whether they were male or female. They then realized that high heels make different sounds on the stage floor, so they had people audition behind a screen and barefoot. And once they adopted that procedure, the London Symphony Orchestra got better musicians and better female representation.